Okay, welcome back. In this section of the tutorial, we are going to be focusing on creating this, the radio tower or whatever it is. I'm sure they have a name for it in the show. But we're going to try and create that lattice work using a different type of generator than we've previously used. And we will also work on creating these arched windows. We're not obviously going to be putting the glass in there. Something else, right, we did the array, we cut in these marks. We're not going to cut in these windows. However, if you were interested in doing that, you can use the exact same techniques we used with the bools and grouping and everything else in order to array a set of cubes and inset those, at least get the insets done, right? We're not really going to be putting windows in there, but you could do that on your own as well with the skills we've already learned. And I'm also not going to be cutting in these windows up here. That's actually, because they're all rounded, there's some other techniques and things that we would need to cover that I'm not going to cover in this initial tutorial because it's still pretty early in everyone's process. Okay, so let's go ahead and switch over to Cinema. And that tower off the top of the tower is a pyramid. So we're going to go ahead and find our pyramid primitive. We will create that. And I'm going to go ahead and change my view, right? I'm going to go to the viewport and I'm going to select front or right. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to make that full screen. I'm going to hit H so I can frame everything, all the geometry in the scene. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and I have this huge pyramid. I'm just going to go ahead and start dragging it up. I know I'm going to be making some adjustments, but I want to get it at least placed, somewhere close to where it will be eventually. And then I'm going to hit the H so it reframes this. And now the first step, right, is going to be shrinking this down so it's an appropriate size, both in width and in height. And in this case, right, the width one is this outside yellow dot. The center dot here, I think should pull it up. Maybe I have to go up to the top of the tower, which of course is aligned perfectly with the green arrow. But again, right, the green arrow, when it's highlighted in white, means that it's a thing. And then if it's not highlighted in white, it means I'm doing something else. So hopefully, hey, look at that, I actually clicked on the right thing. Obviously, if you just click on the green arrow and drag it down on accident, you can always, bring it back up. This is probably too tall, so I'm going to go ahead and switch to, it's too tall, and I only changed it in one dimension, which is hilarious. It looks like it's got a mohawk right now. Okay, so to start with, we just want to make sure that our height and proportions are right. Obviously, this is not the same. So what I want to do is I want to make sure I have my pyramid selected, and the X dimension, this first value here, is about 30. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that value and paste it into where the Z thing is. And I want you to note, right, so that's going to be too big for the top of that. We need to make it smaller, but it's fine for now. But I want you to note that there's the three values here, but they don't have like a hard labeled X, Y, or Z next to them. And that's because this orientation makes a difference on how these are, how these values are impacted. So if we're Y plus, then this is going to be Y, X, and Z. But when we switch the orientation, it might change how things go. You can experiment with that, but we don't need to change the orientation. It's oriented exactly how we want it to be right now. And so I think this is 30 by 30, and that's clearly like hanging off the edges of this, which isn't going to work for us. So let's go ahead and just change these down to 15 right now. And 15. And then we will rotate our view a little bit. That looks a little bit better. Let's go ahead and check our reference in preview. And you'll see, yeah, that looks like there's about as much of a gap on either side. I'm going to leave it set at 15. And in terms of the height, I think I still have this too tall. The tip does disappear into these other shapes here. But, it probably terminates here where this last ring is. And so I'm going to go ahead and pull the height down just a bit. Where I have this set, I can't actually do it, so I'm moving my view a little bit. I'm just going to snug this down a touch, and then I'm just going to have to realign the base with the top of the tower. So I'll go to my front view and zoom in maybe just a little bit and pull this down. For some reason, my screen is incredibly dark right now, which is making it challenging to see. Hopefully this doesn't make a big difference when in the YouTube video when I post this, but we'll see. Okay, so it's a lot brighter for me now. So I have that set. It's, you know, it's right above the surface. I might want to go ahead and actually, oops. See, sometimes you grab the wrong thing here. I want to move this down along the y-axis, and I want to inset it just a touch into that platform, and you'll see why in a second. Okay, so we've got our pyramid more or less on there. Note that if you want to numerically have it accurate to what I've got, it's 120 units more or less right now, and so you can go ahead and do that. All right, so let's go ahead and full screen our perspective view. And let's change, if you may already have Gerard shading and lines on. If you don't, go ahead and change it to that. And you'll see that right now, this pyramid is pretty basic, right? It just has like it has basically a single polygon per surface. And we want to increase the number of segments because what we want to do is I'm going to increase the segments to 3, right? You can see how this splits up the surface now, right? It's got these horizontal cross members and it's got a bunch of triangles. Even though we're working with quads predominantly in Cinema4D, and by quads, I just mean, right, these quadrangles, right? They're not quite squares, but they are four-sided. Because we tend to work in quads. However, everything in 3D software is actually triangles, right? There's actually 2 triangles that make up each one of these quads, and that's how everything works. But oftentimes it's a lot easier to model using quads. It's easier to follow the lines. It just allows an ease of making things in most cases. And there's times when that doesn't work so well and triangles are better. But like for this shape, triangles are usually more useful. And for what we're about to do, it's great that they are already split into triangles. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to use this another generator in order to turn this into like a lattice. So what we're going to do is we're going to go down to our subdivision surface here. We're going to hold down, we're going to click, and we're going to go down to atom array. We're going to go ahead and create an atom array, and we're going to make the pyramid a child of that atom array. And as soon as we do that, you can see that it's made a kind of significant change to our object. It's generated a lot of geometry based on the model that we put in there. This is really useful. It saves a ton of time if you're doing something that, you know, you want the skeleton of the structure, you don't want the surface. But right now, everything is like intersecting and it's really thick and chunky. So we're going to go ahead and select our atom array, and then in the attributes manager, we're going to, you'll see we have the sphere radius, the cylinder radius, and then subdivisions. Subdivisions, right, are going to be subdividing the geometry that this has generated. So if I was to boost this up to 24, you can kind of see I get like a much finer result. I'm going to leave this at 8 for now. This is a pretty small detail, and it's going to be, you know, reasonably far from the camera for its scale. And so we're not going to go super crazy on the amount of geometry we need for this. However, we do need to adjust our sphere radius and our cylinder radius. So to start with, I'm going to set the sphere radius to 2. So it's more or less the same dimensions, right, as the cylinders. And then we're going to go ahead and let's go ahead and reduce the cylinder radius because obviously it's too thick still. We need to be able to see through this thing. So we are going to set this to 1 and see what happens. That's significantly better. I think, you know, if I go to the drawing, the illustration, right, it might be a little bit, we might need them to be a little bit thinner. Let's see here. And so I'm going to go down to 0.5 for now. So they're really skinny. And I'm going to say 0.5 for the spheres as well, right? Because there aren't really nodes there. They're just, I mean, this is like line work, right? They're literally like pen marks or digital pen marks on that original artwork. So we've got this thing, set up. There in the drawing, there are more subdivisions, right? There's more of and these are actually crossed. If we wanted to go completely accurate, we would need to create something on our own in order to do that. But again, right, we're trying to work somewhat quickly. We want something that approximates this, gives the idea of this. It doesn't have to be perfectly accurate. So we are going to, what I would like to do at this point is change so I would like there to be more horizontal members in here. And so what we can do is if we select the pyramid, the segments on the pyramid are going to control, right, how many facets we have here. If I go back down to 1, right, this is pretty plain. If I step up to 2, you can see, right, I get more stuff. And really it's just going to depend on you can set this to whatever you want, right? I found when I was doing some tests that 4 seems to be a good number. It kind of more accurately represents how many cross pieces there are, but you can see it starts to get a little bit thick and dense in here. And so we don't really need to go any further than that. If I do display and go back to Gerard shading, we can see that it's a lattice. It's a little bit thicker than it should be, but you know what? It looks pretty good. So we're going to go ahead and leave that, but that's the atom array. It's a really useful generator. Obviously, in this tutorial, we're not going to go through every generator. Some of these you'll apply and you're going to be like, what the heck is that doing? But some of these, like extrude, loft, and sweep, we are going to be working with those when we do the next set of tutorials on spline-based modeling. There's other ones we'll get to as we move, and there's some that I probably won't cover in this tutorial series. Something to note that I feel like this is a good time to say is if you're wondering how to use something or what a tool's use is on anything in Cinema, let's say we want to know what the subdivision surface does. So I'm going to create a subdivision surface, and it's here in my hierarchy. Then if I go ahead and granted I can't right click on this and do anything. I can just copy the text, which is kind of funny. But if I go to any of the object properties here, if I right click on the word type, for example, and I go down to show help, it will bring up the help menu for the subdivision surface, and it'll drop me right at the type section. But I can actually go, and in this help menu now, they have really good examples of what this can do, what the different settings do, right? All the different types of subdivisions you can do in this case, right? And we will be using subdivision surfaces in later tutorials. It's a really great way to take something that's pretty basic and add a lot more geometry. You can smooth it, and there's ways we can actually weight that smoothing. But we'll be looking at those in later tutorials. But I just wanted you to know that if you need any help with, right, if you're like, I don't know what this does, you can always just right click, go to show help, and the help menu will pop up and take you exactly where you need to go. I have found when we get to rendering with Redshift, there are a few things that don't take you to the right place, but I assume every iteration it gets a little bit better at like locating where you're supposed to go. But for the most part, pretty much every feature is covered, and I would say Cinema's help files are really actually helpful. And some of them get super technical and actually explain things, which is really nice if you're interested in that. Okay, so I'm going to delete that subdivision surface. We don't need that thing in there. We've got our atom array set. Okay, so now we need to create these arches. And we're going to be doing that with a couple of different steps. And the first thing I'm going to do, because I have all this geometry in here already, and it's going to make modeling anything else in here kind of a nightmare. One of the ways I like to work is if I'm building an element that I'm then going to drop back into the scene, but I know it's going to be somewhat involved and I want to be able to have nothing else going on in the scene to get in the way of what I'm doing. What I'll do is I'll save my work. I do have this again set to autosave, but I'll make sure I save my work. And I'm going to create a new file. So I just did Command N on the keyboard for Mac, Control N will do a new file for you. And now we can start to create these archways here. And then we'll copy and paste this and bring it back into our original file. So I'm going to go ahead and to start with, I'm going to create a cylinder, right? So I go to my cylinder object and right, first you can imagine if we go here, take a look, right? We need a cylinder that's actually like stretched in, like it's an ellipse, and it's cut in half. Right? Those are the two things we really need out of this. And also the orientation should be pointing, right, not up, but either aligned with the X or Z plane. I'm going to go ahead and align it with the X plane. So I'm going to click X plus down here in the orientation on the attributes manager. And then there's a couple different ways that I can I can slice this model up, or I could cut it in half, right? The first thing I can do is there's a slice tab for the cylinder. And what that means is if I check mark that, it's going to slice it and basically give me like half of the object in this case, but I can set the starting number of degrees and the ending number of degrees, right? So if I slide the slider over, you can see that it's changing where the start is. If I slide this slider over here, it changes where the end is, right? So instead of from 0 to 180, what I'd really like is probably 90, if I am to 270, right? Should give me an arch that's up top. Now the other thing is, right, the height is, or the radius is not quite where I want it to be. I'm going to want this to be taller. And we'll get this somewhat close here, and then we can use the scale settings to adjust it later. The other thing is, right, it's too thick. This height is intense, so I'm going to go ahead and shrink this down a little bit. Okay, so far so good. And we're not going to do any of the insets or anything for this. We're just going to set this up the way it is. Now, what we could do, and maybe we'll just do this because it'll be fun, right? So let's say this is going to be our glass. And then we also want this edge here, right? So we can do this inset. There's a couple ways we can do it, but we want to make sure that these things are eventually grouped together. So along with a cylinder, there is also a tube primitive. So let's go down to our tube. Tubes and cylinders have a lot of similarities. I'm going to go to the Object tab first, and I'm going to set this to X plus as well. You can already see what's beginning to happen here, which is exciting. And then I want my inner radius to be set to whatever the radius of my cylinder currently is. So if I go to my cylinder and I see it's 61.664, right? I can just select that, copy it, come over to my tube and paste it here. Right, if I hit enter, right, you'll see the tube gets a little bit bigger. Obviously, it's like way too thick at this point. So let's take a look and say, I'm going to start with, let's try 70 centimeters. Right, that looks like it's reasonably accurate in terms of the thickness. And then I know that I want this to actually be a little bit taller, right, because I want it to extend past that point. And now, let's see, we've got these two things done. The next step, obviously, is going to be we need to slice this as well. And so, as I said, tubes are similar. Tubes are one of the objects you can slice. So I'm going to check mark slice, and then I'll set the settings exactly the same. I'll go from 90. And also, if you are in one field, like I'm in the 90 degree, I'm in the field here, if I finish typing what I want and I hit tab, it will automatically jump to the next field and I can just type in 270. Right, and so now that should all be aligned. One other thing I'm going to want to do to both of these objects, and I can hold down Shift when I do this because they have the same, enough of the same settings to do this. So I hold down Shift and select cylinder. Oh, maybe not. Maybe they don't. Okay, so I can't do that. All right, well, we're going to set the rotation segments on these. We can do 48 maybe. I'm going to hit 48 for that one, and I'm going to do 48 for the cylinder as well. Right, because that's going to smooth out this edge so it actually looks nice. I'm going to go ahead and turn on the lines shading. And so I've got this set, fantastic, everything's great. I don't need to save it or anything at this point. You could if you wanted to. So now I need to scale these things. I'd like to scale them together, right? I could also go to coordinates and I could just say, you know, if I wanted it to be twice as tall in the Y direction, right? I should be able to do that to both of these and they should still align, right? You'll notice I am getting a little bit more thickness up here because of the way scale works. This is going to be something where it is it is a little bit of a problem because I'm intentionally just using primitives. We'd actually have to do a bit more work to get this to look accurate with the way shapes and things work in Cinema. Because it's just stretching things, and we'd want to make this editable and do some other tweaking to it to make it fit better without the tube wall getting thicker. So what I'm going to do instead of doing them independently like that is I want to group these together because I know that I'm going to be putting these into an array to make the other copies. And I want to be able to manipulate the position of these things once they're in the array anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and create a null object. I'm going to just call this, maybe archway. And then I'm going to select my tube and cylinder and drop them both into this archway. Now, with this null object, right, before we've controlled the rotation of the null, but we can also just control the scale. So if I do 2 in the Y, it's going to scale everything together as though it's one object, right? And 2 is probably too much, but we're in a really good spot right now to do the next step, which is put this in an array, and then we will take that final object and bring it back into the scene, and then we can tweak the size and scale and stuff until we're happy with it. So we're going to go ahead and create an array, and then make the archway a child of the array. And you'll see now it looks like like a bunch of tents of some sort in a circle. Clearly we don't want that many copies, so we're going to select our array, go to the Object tab. We really only need 3 copies, right? Because remember, with the array, that it's 1 less than the total number you want. So we've got these 4 things, but obviously their orientation is not correct. So we are going to select our archway, go to the Coordinates tab, and then we are going to rotate, and honestly, I never remember if it's H, P, or B. I'm going to rotate P and see if that's correct. Oh, oops, sorry. I have to rotate the tube and cylinder, so I'm going to select those 2 and rotate these. Obviously, that is not the correct rotation. I think H might be right. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so we're going to rotate these 90 degrees. Right, and so now they're facing the 4 cardinal directions. Fantastic. We're in a really good spot to move this into our scene. I don't know what the array radius is yet. We're just going to see what happens when we bring it in. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this, and then we're going to go over to our Planet Express file. We are going to paste this into our scene. And you'll see that they drop in right where they were in the other scene. I can zoom out a little bit. And obviously my radius is too big, and these things are huge. So we can go ahead and let's start by shrinking the radius some. Right, this is probably better. And then we're going to need to shrink the scale of this thing. And so we could, my suggestion would be that we start by scaling down the children of this, and then we go ahead and maybe adjust our scale from there. So I'm going to go ahead and shrink this down pretty substantially. It looks like they're even taller. They're, maybe they're that narrow. They might even be narrower. I'm going to go ahead and make this my radius. I'm going to set the radius to 40. The height I'm going to leave alone for now because remember, we're not doing anything inside the building. And then I am going to take the husk here, the tube, and I'm going to set that inner radius to 40 as well. And then the outer radius should be, I think it was like 15 thick. So, well, let's just say 50 and see if that looks all right. I'm going to rotate down, and I might go ahead and turn on display garage shading lines again, just to make it easier to see what the heck's going on. Yeah, it looks like I probably need this to be even thinner. So let's do 45. That's a lot better, a lot closer to what we're looking for. So let's go ahead and go to one of our side-facing views. I'm going to hit H so I can see everything, and then I'm going to select my array, not the tube or cylinder, If I was to move this tube now, it's actually going to move the tubes, and leave the other part alone. So we want to make sure we have the right object selected, which is our array. And we're going to go ahead and drag this up, It's still like way too huge. In this case, I think it might be easiest to adjust the height of the tube and cylinder. So I'm going to set the height to, I'm just going to go to 65, which is about half of what it was. That looks like it's a lot more useful. I'm going to do this on the cylinder as well. I'm going to say, I might say 60, because we want that to be inset a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and quickly check my this setting, and you can see these are still too big in all dimensions. And so since they're too big in all dimensions, this might be something where I actually just tweak the scale of the archway. But first I'm going to go ahead and pull in this radius. Instead of 99, let's go ahead and do 80 and see if that's too much. That actually looks pretty good. So now we can just reduce the size of these dimensions. And again, we can use scale, or we could come down and do this. Sometimes it's easier to do it with these numerical values here, and then leave only major adjustments here, because then we don't have to be like, oh, well, this has to be 0.75, 0.75, and you just have to tweak it that way. It's kind of annoying. Whereas we could say, all right, well, clearly the width of this tube and cylinder, maybe I'll start with the cylinder, is too much. So I'm going to say, let's set this, the radius to 30 instead. That looks much better. And I'm going to go ahead and go to the tube, and I'll set the inner radius to 30. And the outer radius, as this gets smaller, I actually need fewer units. So I'm going to say 33. Oh, looks pretty good. If I go back and look at the thing, you'll see it's even actually smaller than that probably. So maybe we'll say 25 here, and then we can go to our cylinder and do 25 for the radius here. And then we can, I meant to go back here and say, let's just do 27 here. Now, if I go back to my scene, you can see that that's reasonably accurate. It looks like the arches might be just a little bit taller than I've currently got them. So in that case, I'll go to the archway, go to my coordinates, and I might make this 2.2 for the Y. And if I pop back over here, that's really starting to look pretty accurate to our, to our model. Let me fix that. I don't know what I just did. I must have had my, that still selected and made a change there. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pop back here. And it looks like everything's good. If I rotate down, it's not cutting through the bottom of that plane. And this looks pretty good. They might be a little bit narrow now, but that's something where you could continue to tweak it until you're happy with the outcome. But right, the goal of this tutorial series is just to show you how to do the broad strokes, and then you can go in and tweak and finesse until you're happy with the model. Okay. So that is the last part of this tutorial. This is where we are going to stop with this model. I just realized down here, this cube is like, could probably be pulled forward just a hair like that. There we go. But we are going to stop at this point with this model. Go ahead and make sure you save your work. Things you can do if you want to continue learning is you could look into trying to figure out what objects are going to make the best transformations to, or what would be the best base models to start making these kind of discs or ovals. Is it a sphere that you compress with your scale into a flatter dish? Are you using a capsule? Are there other objects we haven't talked about? But go ahead and experiment. Some students have gone on to make the entire building. If you have the time and you're super excited about it, go for it. And maybe cut these in. These are things you can continue to experiment with if you've got the time and the interest in doing so. Okay. In the next set of tutorials, we're going to go over spline-based modeling. We will make a squid, and we're going to learn about different generators and how to use splines, which are essentially paths, if you've ever used Illustrator before, in order to create curves and smoother geometry and things like that. Thanks for watching.